but it's time for Joel's. Is that okay?
Yeah.
Sure.
Sure. If you think we have, I mean, like I said, I don't want to prevent anyone else from
No, no, no,
going.
no,
So,
no. We got it. We got it.
okay. So, do you want me to jump right into it, Anthony?
Yep.
Okay. So, um,
You could have a little more than 60 seconds too.
thank you. I was looking at shot selection and editing, and I took some notes. I'll read some of them. If it gets too long, I can insert them later in the conversation. But before we even started, I watched it and wrote some things down that kind of caught my eye. So sorry if I'm looking down at a few times. But one of the things I was struck by was how the camera is basically getting closer in terms of the shots that they're using in terms of wide, medium close up, and then full on close up as the scene progresses. So like in particular when they pull into Moe's Motors and he has the flashback and they cut back, we don't see the two shot of them together at that point. It's cutting between the two of them, but they're slightly wider close-ups, like we call them medium close-ups, I think. And then we go back for the other flashback where he sees her in the motel, and when we come back, it's extreme close-ups between the two of them for the rest of that scene. Like the only variation is when he yells at the men, they show them scattering just so that I think it might feel weird if you didn't see what he was yelling at afterwards, but they don't show it before. They show his reaction and then them scattering. And the whole scene is played in these extreme close ups of the two of them, where it's like, top of the head to like barely the neck. And they just get their expressions get to fill the full frame.
Thank
So
you.
I'll say other things
Yeah,
afterwards.
there'll be time for sure.
Yeah.
Who'd like to go next?
Oh, I can go. I think that the most important when it comes to talk about performance is Cheryl Lee just like selling this, and actually to an extent that it was like very upsetting to her because I don't know who here has read Scott's or the Al Strobel interview in Blue Rose magazine, but Al Strobel talks about how his wife had helped comfort Cheryl Lee after I'm not sure if it's like on set or later on in the day, but like Shirley Lee was very upset. And you can tell in that performance that she was like giving it her all. And it was like all the anxiety that was going on with the honking of the horn and Al Strobel yelling that it like really got to her. And I think that's something that permeates the rest of the scene. And then, when we cut to Ray Wise's performance, I think that obviously he sells the anxiety. But for me, the part that's very stressful to me, it's when she directly questions him about like, where were you? And like he has like the worst poker face saying no, and the way he yells "leave us alone," it just sells that he is caught in like like in a total lie. Yeah, so I mean those two, like obviously those are absolutely incredible performances, and Al Strobel. I think it's actually interesting because I don't think too many people on a first watch would really understand what he's saying. I actually later on, like way later down the road, like had to read through what he said. But they're just like this combination of how all these performances come together. And that's not even going to Pamela Gidley as Teresa Banks because there is that sort of trying to sell, the whole sex worker thing of like trying to make him feel like he's like this like really cool guy. But there's that shift she has when like he covers her eyes. Yeah, again, I can talk about more, and I know there wasn't really a 6 second time frame. I just don't want to talk over, John or Andrew or anyone.
Yeah. Thank you, Colin. Very, very interesting. And it's hard for me to not talk about all the connections this scene has to other parts before and after this scene, including a lot of stuff in the return. But I focused on sound, and it seemed like it was really like the full kitchen sink was thrown at this scene. There's a lot of sort of natural sound, a lot of screeching of the tires, yelling of the actors. A lot of sound effects and sound design stuff as well. That sort of whiny sound that we're also familiar with comes and goes. Um, uh, the the character with the mask and the stick sticking out. I forget his name. He has his own little sort of jazzy type black dog sound playing. When we see Pamela Gidley in the bed, there's a strum on a guitar that sounds like the first strum we hear in the Red Room, which is very interesting. Um, uh, just a lot of chaotic elements created by the sound. A lot of reminiscences to Bobby at the intersection in The Return, when you have that just chaotic street scene. But maybe more on that later. Andrew?
Thinking about scene placement. I mean, I know this scene comes almost right before, things really start to go off the rails for Laura. And it's just such an interesting placement because this scene going from her in the car to Leland in his flashback almost satisfies the storytelling concept of anagnorisis for both of these characters at the same time, where she now comes to her anagnorisis or full realization about her dad. I mean, this is where it really starts to sink in that it is him. And it's a moment where during the flashback, I mean, obviously Leland already knows kind of what he's doing at this point, but we really get to see him kind of come to a realization of how pathetic he is, as he turns the corner and sees, his own daughter, like his kind of whatever, just the sad nature of his like incestuous longing kind of put in his face, and disgusts him kind of. So just a great place for that as we move into the climax,
Very, very interesting. And I just looked up the word as you were talking. Yeah. Good one. Anagnorisis. John?
Yeah, I guess I'm gonna play off a little of what Andrew just said. I was thinking about it. And I might be a little critical, since we all love Twin Peaks, and certainly I do. But there's room, I think, to question some things. And so I question this a little bit, watching it, I guess, out of context. Why the flashbacks happened here. Obviously, there's been this disruption, there's been this eruption, it's a breakthrough of energy that triggers these reactions in Laura and Leland. But from a storytelling point of view, and I know that Lynch struggled with the editing on Fire Walk with Me and trying to get it to the certain length and convey all the information that he wanted to. And in fact, he couldn't convey all the information that he wanted to. But it seemed, I guess, I felt it almost seemed a little forced that the flashbacks happened for Leland in that moment. It seemed like it, and again, I'm seeing it out of context, so maybe if I saw the whole thing, it would work better for me. But I was just trying to figure out what the motivation for Leland to have those flashbacks at that particular moment.
I can probably address that because it's in the scene right before that. When he walks into the house, he sees Donna and Laura together on the couch, and then it flashes to her and Renette. So
excellent.
I think that's the
concept around it, and so I'd forgotten that. It's been a while since I've seen it. So okay, well, in a way, you've answered my critique, which was I felt that at least again within the the scene out of context, it just seemed like it didn't quite work for me. But yeah, okay, I forgot that part of it. And I would also, I guess, also comment on the sound. I mean, the sound there is amazing, and I think Lynch likes to, he likes to create chaos, and he creates chaos through some things that don't always seem to fit. There's a scene in Dune where Paul is about to fight Jameis with the Fremen, and when there's sort of this sort of sudden conflict, if you look in the background, all of a sudden there's all these flames that flare up in the background. There's no logical reason why in the middle of the desert there would be these flames just suddenly erupting in the background. But what it does visually is create a sense of chaos. And so I think Lynch is doing some of that here, particularly by inserting that dog barking in those shots where Philip Gerard is yelling at Leland. There's just this tumult, and the dog barking adds to the discomfort and the chaos. of that scene. And I think Lynch is clever in the way he will use things that just do not fit, but they do create they do create the feeling, the visceral feeling that he wants the audience to feel.
Yeah,
I feel like there's something almost like ritualistic in this scene, which I really love, like the way it's structured and the way it flows. And I think, because before I kind of outlined the change in the shot selection, I didn't really, I guess, get into why I think that is so effective. I mean, for one thing, just viscerally, it ratchets up the intensity as you go, and he saves those just. And there's something about the lighting too. There's like the texture of their skin, the kind of the sweat. Like there's just something like crystalline perfect about those shots, and he saves them till the very end when the characters are confronting each other, and they're not really their exchange of gazes, I think, is really interesting because Laura's staring right at him as she asks him these questions, and he won't look at her and until the final point where he just flat out lies. He turns to her and he says, "Oh yes, I was like before then. It's all hesitation. He's looking straight ahead. His thoughts."
Very Bill Hastings right there. Yeah.
Yeah, right. Yeah, and then it's right. Lynch is good with characters in desperate moments, and so he turns and looks at her, and at that moment she's not looking at him. She kind of looks away. Oh, I don't know, and she can't like quite look back at him. So it's these two characters. They're like out of sync, but also really pushing each other. And this is the moment. This is one of the most crucial scenes in the film, I think. And the Teresa Banks does it on the Teresa Banks flashbacks do it on like a kind of obvious expository level. But I think even just the way the dialogue occurs between Leland and Laura gives it this importance, which is this is in some ways I wouldn't say quite the reveal scene because we kind of get two of those sandwiching this. We get her in the bed, seeing him in the bedroom. We get before that her seeing him come out of the house. But this is the scene where we get his own responsibility and sense of it. And, we kind of like, I love the fact that when we cut into the flashback, we see the magazine and we hear his voice. We don't see him looking at it because they had that shot and it's in the missing pieces. And Anthony, you and I were talking about which version to kind of go with here. And there's like a cut where they combine the missing pieces together, and I just don't think it's as effective for me. And one of the reasons is when you cut in there, it's like, here we are watching Leland. It's like, no. We're experiencing this through Leland's eyes in this moment. And this whole flashback has to unfold that way. Other than the one moment where Teresa is looking back at him, which I love, where she kind of gets this moment of recognition. And I've talked about this before, so I'll make it brief, but I do love the fact that we don't see the ring on her finger. To me, throughout this film, it's associated with, I think, knowledge in a way, like her knowledge of who Leland is, Laura's knowledge of what Leland did to Teresa, Leland's knowledge of his daughter being involved with all this. And so we don't see the ring because an ice pack is kind of blocked, or an ice tray is being held in her hand, so it's blocking our view. Keep in mind her arm goes numb, particularly when she doesn't have the ring on it. And then she turns, she looks back like, what's going on? The wheels are starting to turn. And in that moment, you see the ring flash because her hand lifts. It's a practical thing, but it also serves the symbolic purpose. Maybe accidentally, I don't know, but Lynch has brilliant intuition. So if it's accidental, it still makes sense.
Oh, I had two things that stuck out that both connect with, like for one, going off the sound, this connects to what John was saying earlier about like the ambiguous motivation of the lodge spirits. Like in the show, we kind of see the little man and Philip both kind of presented as helpers, right? But here that, we learned that the little man is also the arm, presumably the kind of whatever demonic arm that Mike removed. And in this scene, the first thing we hear when he comes up on him is that the whooping sound of the little man, which kind of ties the little man with Mike and Philip Gerard and kind of throws those motivations into doubt, especially when it's revealed at the end that he consumes the Garmonbozia and speaks through Philip Gerard to do it. And also with performance, just a great little choice, I think, that kind of goes off what Colin was saying, is how when Pamela Gidley is in bed with Ray Wise and he puts his, hand over her face, you can just see her just, go limp, which is something you might do if you're a sex worker suddenly in a precarious position with a nasty man. Just go limp, try not to like resist or make it worse. Just a great little touch from her to kind of just freeze up like that, kind of.
Actually, one thing I want to say is that this struck me the first time I watched Fire Walk with Me is how these flashbacks are used to show the magnitude of how damaging these secrets are. Because for the way I look at it is in the original series, where you think of characters like Hank or Catherine Martell, Leo Johnson, Josie Packard, they're all living like these double lives we're just seeing in real time. But having these flashbacks, especially like relatively close together, it kind of gives this sense of how damaging it is that like for like close to a year, like Leland knew about like, what Laura was doing. Laura's starting to pick up on a lot of things with him. And it's just showing just like, how like this stuff really comes back to haunt you. It's like, I guess to cycle back to the original series, it's when James is at Donna's house and he's talking about how they don't want to have secrets because of how much damage that can be to a relationship. And so I just think of how effective that Lynch used that so effectively in this movie in particular.
Yeah, I love the fact too that the scene, even though the central action is kind of this strange one-armed man driving up in a van and yelling at them, Leland keeps talking about him after it happens, and almost all of the things Laura says, even sometimes while it's happening, are about Leland. Like she does have one moment where she says, "Who was that man? Did you know him?" And it almost feels like even there she's talking about Leland, like who was that man? So there's like this sense throughout. It's almost like it's not as literal in Mulholland Drive where we're seeing a dream refracting. Like these things are kind of really happening within the Twin Peaks world in a different way. But you almost get the sense of like there was no man in the van and Laura is reacting to some freak out by her father, like it's just this kind of amazing writing and delivery in that scene where it's her instinct is like, what's wrong with you? Calm down, stop yelling. Even though this guy was the one who, within the, dramatic context of the scene, was instigating it all. He's really there as like some kind of almost like visual audio catalyst for what's really a scene between these other characters.
That's interesting because so is the choice to give readers dialogue that we can't really hear, which
Yeah.
Lynch will or the creators of Twin Peaks will do that now and again, because the words matter and they are very interesting when you put the subtitles on or when you find out what Gerard is saying. But it's more that sort of visceral, like bombardment that is like really in the forefront more than the actual dialogue. One thing I wanted to ask you guys, and also this will probably be on YouTube, I imagine, and anybody who wants to comment and add in, that would be great. I have a little question. The worker at the gas station, and it's funny that it's another gas station, he says something to Leland. He's like, you don't want to hit the brakes like that. He's like, take care of your car. And then he keeps talking, but his audio cuts out for like a full sentence. It's very strange. And if anybody can imagine, any lip readers out there could tell me what he said. I'm very curious. I'm sure it's not important, but it's really weird.
I'm really glad you brought that up because one of the things I wanted to mention was there's a couple elements in the scene which are almost comedic. One is that guy. And Lynch always kind of uses, I guess, difference like disability or like some personal quirk, usually uses it somewhat for humor. So like we have two in that. We have the guy stuttering, you'll burn out your engine, all that. And then also the old man very slowly going across the crosswalk. But it feels like these were things that he had in mind before that he really reduced in the editing because you almost don't notice them. Like I probably saw the film a few times before I even picked up on, oh, it's another funny old Del Nibbler. Like you don't even, he doesn't close in on it. It's only there to like serve its purpose. And my guess would be he probably shot more with the mechanic and maybe more with the old guy. And in the edit it was like, no, this isn't Wild at Heart. Like there's a few elements in Twin Peaks, and you see more of it in the film in the Chet Desmond scenes that are like kind of leading off of that like absurdist Lynch energy of the early 90s, where he almost didn't, and the script he wrote with Bob Engels certainly has this in spades. And then it's like in the process of making it and watching Sheryl Lee perform, it kind of became this different thing and flowed more into like the Lost Highway era in a way. So I love looking at the film and almost picking out like, oh, there's a little Wild at Heart, there's a little like On the Air that kind of got cast aside when he figured out what film he was really making, which I think John has written quite a bit about that process. It kind of, I think, turned me onto it in a way.
I guess since we're actually kind of in the, I guess, kind of miscellaneous aspects of these scenes, one thing I was thinking, and John, it might have been your interview with Al Strobel, but I know that he said at some point there's that scene because he's driving like that truck, and he slams like a little too close to the car. That apparently that was the car Leon was driving was actually David Lynch's car, and like I think David Lynch was like angry. I don't know if he yelled at Al Strobel, but he was clearly unhappy with like nearly legitimately crashing because Al is driving like it's like dangerous driving. This is not just some stuntman who I mean I nothing I don't know, but you can tell that there's something very unwieldy about the way he's driving that you wouldn't see in like other films. And I think the fact that he almost crashed in that car and the way that he like recklessly drives around those old people, it just has this like kind of weird sense of danger. Like it's something that you don't really see in like, big, and I know this was not a big budget movie, but it's just something that you don't really see, too often of that like serious danger, like in like these otherwise kind of small scenes.
And he lost his arm in a car accident, now that I think about it, as like a teenager in the
Yeah.
50s. He flew out of the thing, got his top of his head knocked off and his arm killed. So that is, I've never thought of that before, I don't think. Watching that scene, that he's almost reenacting his own trauma in a way.
Yeah, I think Al Strobel, I could be wrong. I think he said that was his own car, that wagon.
Yeah.
Chinook. And he actually drove it to one of the Twin Peaks festivals. I think it was 93 or 94. I got pictures of it. That's what he lived in, that vehicle. He drove that around in Oregon, and he drove it to the set of Firewalk with Me. The one-armed man, or Philip Gerard, was supposed to be driving a different vehicle in that. I forget. He says what it was, and I forget what it was. It might have been another big car, but he told Lynch, "Hey, I could drive. I drive this." And Lynch, being Lynch, saw an opportunity to bring something unique to that. And so, yeah, that's Al Strobel's camper, which he's driving in those scenes.
That's pretty cool. I think Colin just found a little gem, because Lynch was probably cursing his head off, and that's why we have that crescendo of sound to drown out him yelling at Al Strobel. Maybe that's the origin of that. I'm just kidding. Sorry.
But yeah, no, because usually I guess when I think of this scene, I usually think of just like the core, like just anxiety that I feel. But like, no, now that we've dissected all these different facets, it actually does make me realize just the magnitude of how much is truly within, what was it, like 5, 6, 7 minutes of this. Yeah, no, but I think that I think that's like the way I look at it, is that a lot of this stuff can look very anxiety induced on surface level, but if you look at it independently, you can like really pull through a lot of great stuff through it.
Yeah, well said. I do have one more scene.